Yo, what's up guys? It's Storm bringing you a new card review today for Victoria Hand. So Victoria is an interesting card. She is a 2/3 ongoing card. Your cards that were created in your hand have +2 power. She is the first spotlight cash of the week and well, of the month, and she's honestly very good. She is very good. She has been a interesting card in card generation decks, such as decks that include Kate Bishop, Devil Dino, Collector, amongst other cards like Swarm too, and Devil Dino. These cards all happen to work together, and Victoria Hand just gives that extra oomph to those decks. So let's hop right into why this card is very good, and let's go over the bread and butters. So the first thing I want to mention about the bread and butters is card generation, right? So like I said, Kate Bishop, Agents of Shield, and Snow Guard, right? These are all cards that add cards to your hand. The specific thing about Victoria Hand is that the cards have to be added into your hand. These have to be cards that specifically state add a 3, add a 4 cost card into your hand. So Iron Patriot, the season pass card, works perfectly well with Victoria Hand. And that +2 power is nothing to kind of scoff at. It adds up over time when it comes to these decks. These decks are random, right? You play Agent Coulson down, you get a random 3 and 4, but you can get some really bad cards. You can end up getting Electro and a really bad 4 cost card, right? Victoria Hand kind of pulls through with that +2 power. You'd be surprised how many times that Victoria Hand will actually boost that lane and help you win it. +2 is a lot for one singular card. If you have 4 cards that were created in hand in one lane, that's +8 power from this 2 costed card. So she's pretty insane, man. The other 2 decks that I found her to be pretty interesting in are ongoing decks. So again, I mentioned Devil Dino before, but you can also do something like Onslaught, right? That's going over the top, but it's definitely something that you can do. You can also do Discard. So Discard is interesting because Discard has 2 cards in that archetype that you want to discard and basically get crazy value from Victoria Hand. The first one is Swarm. Swarm becomes a 0 costed 5 power card. That is really good, right? Helicarrier. Helicarrier gives you a whole hand full of cards, right? It's like getting the location Triskelion in your hand, +2 power to every card. So that's just like with this one single 2 costed card is just a huge boost to, you know, that specific discard strategy of, you know, creating these swarms over and over, or, you know, popping Helicarrier, and now you have all these kind of generated cards, but Victoria Hand is benefiting them. You know, she's giving them that power. So those are some of the decks that I've tried her into, you know, that I've had some success with. But let's go over some of her pros. So one of the pros that I would say is pretty interesting about Victoria Hand is, with such a strong ability, you would think that they would not give her a 2/3 stat line, and 2/3 is not the best, right? But it's not horrible. Look at something like Madam Web. Madam Web doesn't enable move cards, right? Victoria Hand enables card generation, but she's also a 2/3. So if she happens to get her ability taken from her, she can kind of stand on her own somewhat, right? It's not like she is like a 2/0 or 2/1, right? 2/3 is a pretty decent stat line, and the amount of power that she ends up giving to these decks, it's nothing to scoff at. You can end up, you know, Victoria Hand ends up being something like maybe even like a 215, 211, you know, 213 at times, because it's just the amount of pure power she's giving to these cards. Because she is an ongoing card, I would say that she can be played anytime. So you don't have to rush to put Victoria Hand out on the field. There are actually times where, because you're playing a whole bunch of, you know, cards that are generated in hand, that Victoria Hand on turn 4, right? I mean, on turn 6 will really give you a lot of power, right? Especially since she's a low costed card. You can even combo something with like Collector, right? You could put Collector down, Victoria Hand with 2 1 cost cards like Snow Guard or Agent 13, and there you go. You're generating 3 cards in hand. You're giving Collector, right, a bunch of cards, and Victoria Hand are buffing the other cards that you already have on field, right? So there's a lot of synergy with her, and I think she is honestly worth the pickup. The pros are you know, very strong. I would say the last pro you could say about her is that the archetype she fits into, you know, card generation decks, they haven't been the strongest because they're randomness, right? But they've always kind of needed one card that will kind of give it its last push and put it into a situation where it's like, oh wow, this is what we needed. We needed a card that's gonna buff these card generated cards, right? And just go over the top. And honestly, Victoria Hand is causing some of these decks to reach like 20 something power, 30 something power, and that's enough to beat some of the stronger decks in the game. So I think she's really good. And let's talk about some of the negatives, right? The cons of Victoria Hand. Let's go over the counters. Enchantress. Victoria Hand is an ongoing card, so Enchantress was obviously going to be a problem here. But you also have cards like Rogue, Red Guardian, and even Lady Deathstrike. Now, Lady Deathstrike was something that I didn't initially think of when I was doing this video. But what's interesting about Lady Deathstrike is Victoria Hand isn't the card that's receiving power, she's giving it. So she's almost always going to be a target for Lady Deathstrike because she'll always be a 3 power card, right? Lady Deathstrike isn't the best card in the game, but she's definitely a good tech card to handle some of these lower costed options in the game, especially with, you know, spoiler, Moonstone coming out, which will, you know, be insane with Victoria Hand as well. So these 4 cards I would say are definitely the main counters to Victoria Hand. One other one that I can think of is Echo. Echo is also another card you might want to slot in. It's cheaper than these cards here. I mean, a lot of these cards are very high costed. Red Guardian is all around best 3 cost card in the game, right? But Echo kind of gives you that, people forget about this card. If I just throw an Echo here, I know at least in this lane, I don't have to worry about Victoria. So maybe you can have Rogue or Enchantress, you know, kind of be pocketed in the deck later on to handle Victoria if you want to specifically counter this card. Some of the other downsides I would say for Victoria Hand is definitely the randomness of the card itself. It's an ongoing card that gives card generated cards +2 power, but the thing is, even if +2 is a lot of power, but it's still not enough to sometimes push some of these, you know, really bad cards in the game to a point that you want them to be, especially if you're going against some decks that have very specific strategies like move or bounce or asserter. You know, these decks, they have a specific combo strategy they're doing every game. Mind you, you're trying to just make whatever you can make work with the card generation decks and just say, hey, come on Victoria, give me the +2 power, I need it. So she can definitely suffer from RNG, and I wouldn't say she's the most ideal turn to play, mainly because the cards that mainly counter her, they want her to already be on the field. The thing about Victoria, she is a late game card, right? You play her on turn 6 and she doesn't have to worry about cards like Enchantress, Rogue, and Red Guardian, but that's where Echo comes in. So it's definitely like a give or take. You know, you make those decisions on how you should counter this card. But I would say if you have her in hand and it's turn 2, it can be a bit problematic because you wonder, should I put her down? I don't really know. It's up to you. She is a decent curve play, but it's definitely a con if you have to think about, should I put this 2 costed card on the field on turn 2, right? And then the last thing I would say is that her decks are generally built around her. So she doesn't want to be placed in any deck. She wants to be in specific archetypes that will greatly benefit her. The thing about that though, she can now be pigeonholed into a certain role. If you get Victoria Hand, you're telling yourself, I'm going to play card generation decks, right? I'm going to spend these spotlight keys or these tokens on this card, and I have to play it in there. If I don't want to play those kind of decks, then Victoria Hand is useless. I mean, essentially useless. The great thing about her, I would say though, is as time goes on, she'll only get stronger. So, you know, it's kind of a give or take once again, but those are generally the cons with Victoria. So the first deck that I'm gonna go over here is Icky Vicky. So Icky Vicky is a interesting deck. It's a card generation deck that features some kind of like different options. Really the main different option is Nebula. So Nebula is here just to give me a strong 1 cost option that just will slowly go over, you know, power procedures, things like that. So essentially Nebula will hit like a 1/7 if left alone. and just force opponents to play in the lane. There's going to be times where you want to play Nebula and just say, hey, if you're going to play in this lane and counter it, sure, go ahead, waste your cards, go to that lane. I will use my card generation deck to kind of outpace you in another lane. So that's really why she's in here. If you don't have Nebula, maybe Hydra Bob or some other stronger one cost cards like Ant-Man or something could possibly work here. The goal of this deck is to generate cards. So you have card generators like Snow Guard, Mirage, Hawkeye, right? And then you have Agent Coulson, right? The thing about this deck though, it can fall behind on power because it's a bit, I would say it's a bit susceptible to things like Shadow King. Collector has maybe like a 2/9 power. Shadow King, boom. Devil Dino, you put Devil Dino out on turn 5. Shang-Chi. So there are some things you have to kind of worry about, the typical counters that you have to run into. But the deck is good, you know. The fact that Mirage gives you a card in hand with +2 power, and then Victoria in hand further buffs that card +2 power, just kind of gives you some really strong options depending on the certain decks that you go against. Quinjet is here to further make some of these cards even cheaper. So for example, having a sorry guys, having a, how do you do it? I'm trying to get to the bird. Okay, having a 2-cost snow guard hawk, right, be a 2/5 is really good. This effect is insane. You know, ignoring all locations until the end of the turn could let you win games against Limbo, right? Have you get into locations that you usually wouldn't be able to. The bear is a 2/4, right? Well, would be a 2/6 with Victoria in hand that lets you activate certain locations and kind of get a little cheeky, you know, cheeky win in that location. Let's say there are ninjas there, -2 power. You pop this, you put another -2 ninja on the enemy side. You know, like there's things like that that you can do that that makes these cards so flexible and strong, especially if you throw Quinjet. Quinjet also helps to make Agent Coulson decks, right? The 4 and 5 cost cards become 3 and 4 cost cards, right? Same thing with Mirage. Mirage doesn't always copy a 1 cost card, it could be a 2, and that just further creates, you know, this kind of deck where you're just generating, right? Collector is just benefiting off of everything. And the Victoria hand is like, well, here you go guys, +2 power across the board. One of the main goats of this deck, I would definitely say, is Mockingbird. Mockingbird ends up becoming a card where, because you're putting all these card generated cards on the board, she now is cheaper. So sometimes you'll have like a 3/9, which is really good. You know, there'll be situations where, you know, late game, your collector just needs that extra little bit of power, right? So you could put like a 3/9 down or a 4/9 down with a Mockingbird, and then you play something like Snow Guard and Mirage or Hawkeye, and you know, collector's getting power. Mockingbird is just a really good static card, and then you have some tech options like Red Guardian that just shuts down a bunch of different card types, and Mystique. Now Mystique may look a little weird in this deck because the only option she can really go after is Quinjet, Victoria hand, and Devil Dino, but when you get it to work, it really works, right? You put Devil Dino down on turn 5, you copy the Mystique with turn 6, maybe put a Victoria hand down and a Snow Guard, and that's just a lot of power, you know, especially if there are cards on the board that is going to benefit from Victoria, or if you have Collector on the board, and Snow Guard will help get that power up there. So this is definitely a deck I've been playing and it's been pretty fun. Meta wise, I would say it's okay. Definitely try it out. I haven't really climbed much this season, but I've definitely enjoyed this deck. The second deck that I would like to show is a discard cook. Now this deck is typical discard. It just has a few extra options in. So Fenris Wolf, Victoria hand, and Helicarrier, right? These are all options that you don't really see too much in a discard deck, right? The way you want to play this deck is essentially build power off of discarding Scorn, You want to either place Morbius or Collector out on turn 2 or turn 3 respectively. But because they're also low cost cards, these cards can be placed later in the game, especially Morbius. Morbius is going to have all that power from cards you discarded because he's an ongoing, so it doesn't really matter, right? But if you can, if you have both these cards in hand on turn 2, put Collector down because his power only adds after you place him down. And then Fenris Wolf. So Fenris Wolf is in this deck because Gambit or Moon Knight will destroy or discard a card, right? Giving you, you know, your opponent's card that has been discarded or destroyed, and this kind of helps you get some of that power back that you will be missing. Grandmaster is a good option to use if you just need an extra discard. You know, late game, if you need to make a crazy play, you could always pair Grandmaster with Colleen Wing, with Blade, or even Gambit. You know, you get 2 destroys in 1 turn or 2 discards in 1 turn. Some of the options that you really want to go for when you're using Moon Knight is to aim for your Swarm because he's an even costed card, or aim for your Helicarrier, which will help, you know, buff Collector with all the random cards. Plus, all these cards that Collector gives you, that Helicarrier gives you, is going to be buffed by Victorian Hand. So there's a lot of synergy in this deck. Sometimes if you do not get your combo pieces, let's say you get certain cards and the order that you get them is a little weird, it's just not working out, you know, just hit the retreat button. But when this works, it really works, and it has been very fun. It's something that most people aren't really playing from what I've seen with Victorian Hand. I haven't seen many Helicarrier decks, and I've always loved this kind of deck because it just works really well with Collector, and it's just different from the typical discard. But yeah, let's go on to my final star rating for Victorian Hand. So what I would say Victorian Hand is, I would say roughly a 4 out of 5 star card. She is a strong option in the decks that she goes in, card generation and discard. I think as time goes on, she will only get stronger because there will definitely be more card generation decks coming out, right? Card generation cards, sorry. And her stat line is not that bad. So you put those two together with so much power that she's adding on a board. Again, this card can sometimes get to 215, 211, 213. These are really high numbers for just the 2 costs. I mean, we're talking numbers that Thena gets to. We're talking, you know, numbers that some of the stronger cards in the game essentially get to, like Scream. So I think she is definitely a great card that has been released. I think that Second Dinner is doing a good job of kind of introducing these cards that kind of low-key buff some of the older cards in the game, right? Agent Coulson, Devil Dino, Collector. These are all early pool cards, but because they are early pool cards and Second Dinner is kind of weird about buffing them, I love that they introduced this kind of card that say, hey, we're not going to specifically touch these cards, but hey, here you go, we're going to give you Victorian Hand that essentially does the same thing. So, you know, it's cool to see their kind of design philosophy on it. But yeah, generally my final thoughts is, you know, this card generation decks welcome this new addition. Victorian Hand gives the deck she works in the power they need to be able to contend with strong meta decks. She's a low cost, high impact card that's sure to get stronger as more card generation comes out to snap. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I just wanted to give my small review on Victorian Hand, and yeah, have a good one.